So we have been now for a few weeks looking at what the prophets have been telling the Jewish people as they have been returning from exile. And so this morning we are starting with another one of those prophets. This is the prophet Zechariah. And they're dealing with another kind of similar, but some of the same struggles, and but coming at it from a different perspective this morning. And so in Zechariah, what we see is the start that there is this kind of two-part solution that God is giving to the people so that they can make their way going forward, so that they can see more clearly the path that God has set in front of them. And so we get into this in chapter 1, starting in verses 2 and 3, and it says this: "The Lord was terribly angry with your ancestors, but you must say to the people, the Lord of heavenly forces proclaims, 'Return to me,' says the Lord of heavenly forces, 'and I will return to you,' says the Lord of heavenly forces." So the first part of this is, don't be like your ancestors. They weren't doing things right, and they struggled against that, so don't do things the way that they did them. And then the second part is that God is faithful, that you do this, you will see the promise that you will experience the promise that God has given to you. And in fact, you will be blessed. And that blessing will become important in a minute. But let's first pause at the first one of these. Don't be like your ancestors. Now, it's not enough to say, don't be like your ancestors. Because what that really is that is a shorthand way of saying something else. Saying don't be like your ancestors is kind of hiding the important part of this puzzle, because it's not just don't be like them, but you have to actively be different from them. And we should also say that ancestors here doesn't mean people back in ancient times, but could also be you from like 10 minutes ago. Don't be the way that you were before. That's the first part of this, that you have to be different going forward, because how we got to this point did not serve us well, and so that means that we need to be different going forward. So we don't be like we were before, but we need to actively be different as we go forward. Now, the trouble with this is that is the hard path. The easy path is what got them into trouble in the first place, that they weren't doing as God had called them to do, and look at where that got them. So now we've got to do what we should have done in the first place, but this takes more work. It is an active work that we have to do. Now, to do this right, that takes activity. I know I've said that, and I've been repetitive at this point, but I want to give us an example of what this looks like. For me, it is no surprise that I like food. Right? Y'all know this. I know this. You all spoil me with deviled eggs on a regular basis. So we have this agreement. We all know that I enjoy food. But I would also like to lose weight, and I'd like to be healthier. I mean, that sounds like that shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but that's what I would like to do. But I also know for me that losing weight is a challenge. It is not something that I have ever been very good at. And it is a real challenge for me, one that I have tried lots of different things over the years, and none of that has really seemed to work. Diets don't work because I like tasty food, and too many diets take out all of the tasty food that I like to eat. And up until recently, I had to be aware of my job. One of the things I love about my job is that up until recent times, I would have lots of meetings and lunches and whatever else that would be centered around food and coffee and all of those things that are really, really tasty but aren't good for me. Like if someone could come up with a healthy version of biscuits and gravy, I would be all over that. In fact, I would buy stock in that company and I would be set for life. I'd be great. But that's not how that works. Now, that's one side of it. The other part of it, some folks would say, well, okay, if you aren't going to eat well, then you just need to exercise more. And that's great. Except that everything we know about weight loss tells us that you are probably not going to exercise your way into losing weight. Now, exercise is incredibly important and it is necessary for the part of a healthy life. But when I can go grab a candy bar and in just a few bites I can wipe out a half hour's worth of exercise, that means that's going to be a problem. And that is not going to be a way that I am going to get out of that. Now, this is where I need to put a caveat into place for some things. And that is that when we begin talking about specific things to do to change past behaviors, then what this means is that that's going to be different for everybody, and that all of those specific things are going to be different. But we can take a step back from that, because oftentimes we get caught up in the specifics. Someone say, "Well, to lose weight, go on this diet. I did this diet and it was great," or "I went and I exercised for 3 hours every day and that was great and I lost all this weight." That's great, but those are very specific things that aren't going to work for everyone. And so what do we come back to? What is it that actually makes this work that we need to look at that will help us to get through, or will help me to get through that? And that's where I had to look at something different. And what we know about weight loss is that the best way of losing weight is that you create a large difference between the number of calories that you bring in and the number of calories that you burn. To lose weight, you need to burn more than you are bringing in. That is very simple math, and however you get there is what will work if you want to lose weight. That's the basic principle. Now, for years, I have intellectually known that. But you all know me well enough by now to know that if I intellectually know something, that doesn't always mean that it has made it to here, to something that I really know. And that has been the thing that I have always struggled with, is how do I, break this up so that I'm doing what needs to be done. So after venting my frustration one night here just not too long ago, we figured out something different to try. Now remember, I've tried a lot of things. I have failed. More importantly, I have failed at a lot of things over the years to try and make this work. The solution we're looking at is one that I kind of half-heartedly tried several years ago, but a lot of things have changed since then, and so we're trying it again. And that is on my Fitbit app that I have on my phone and that I can also see on my watch a lot of times. You can log what you eat every day, and that will tell you how many calories that is, and it also gives you a reasonable count of the calories that you are burning. And so then I can pull up on my phone and I can look and I can see there's this handy dandy little bar graph that shows how many calories I've taken in, how many calories I've burned, and I want this number to be higher than this number, and the bigger that space, the better off that I am. I'm a very visual person. I also like numbers, and so this so far seems to be working for me, that I can see this. When I know that I have to commit to, if I want to stop and have a bag of potato chips, or worse, that I want to stop and get a donut from Casey's, I know that I'm going to have to log that in there. And then these numbers are going to change based on what it is that I log in there. That somehow, for some reason, that is actually working well for me right now. It can, at the very least, be that thing that trips that momentary whatever inside of me that keeps me from grabbing an extra soda wherever it is that I happen to be at that point in time. Now, I say all this today not because I want to tell you all about my weight loss journey. It's not really something I like to share with people, but it does serve a point. Because I say all of that today because what we're looking at in Zechariah is a very similar sort of thing. And we get that start in chapter 1. And we get these two conditions that are laid out for us. Remember that one is that don't be like your ancestors, and the second one is that if you can do this, then you will be blessed. That if you can match these things up, that God is still cares and will bless you for doing that. And so those are the two conditions that are laid out for us. But that's just kind of one part of things. Because between Zechariah chapter 1 and chapter 6, Zechariah has these 8 visions that are different things that kind of go into different pieces of what putting these two conditions into practice actually looks like. And what I want us to do is I want us to take a look at the one from chapter 3. And there's this way, I love this vision that he has, because this is it's the vision of how the high priest Joshua is made clean so that he can serve the temple. It's both about the person of Joshua himself, but Joshua is also standing in for us. He is serving as a symbolic representative of the Jewish people. Learning, we'll see through him what it is going to take for the Jewish people to be able to go forward. And it starts off in this very similar place, one that we have, that it feels like we should know because we've seen it before, just like in the book of Job. We have God who is acting as judge, and then we have the adversary, or the accuser, or in Hebrew it is Hasatan, from which we get the term Satan. I don't know why I put that extra accent in there. So you know kind of now who it is that we're talking about here. And the adversary is acting as the prosecutor in this. And Joshua is standing up, and the prosecutor is accusing him of all of these things. And so what this lays out for us is this enduring challenge of what it takes to make a change. Because remember, it's not enough to just be different, it's just not enough to not be who we were before. But in order to do that, we have to let go of those things that came before. They can't not just be their ancestors, but they have to change, and that change requires that we let go of so much else. Because what's one of the hardest things that there is to deal with about sin? Think about that for a second. You might say, well, it's not sinning, it's not doing all those things. There's a lot of answers that you could give there. But the biggest one is that we've done it before. We have sinned before. One of the hardest things about giving up sinning is that we have sinned. We have history. We know what it's like. We know what the results of that sin are. Some of them, we even liked those results. I have to tell you, I like it when I get that extra, I get the full order of biscuits and gravy instead of just the half. I mean, that is something that I enjoy, even if it is not good for me. But also, this is the pernicious one of this, if we didn't like it, it is still there in our past. And it will get in the way of our future. We are still impacted by the sin that has come before because it still is influencing the decisions that we make today. For me, in my much more tame example than what the Jewish people were going through, I have many years of failure at losing weight. I'm going to be 40 years old this summer. I have approximately, I'll be generous and say, 39 and a half years of being really bad at it. That is just, I have been a failure at that all my life. And that is something that is really hard to get past. All of those failures make it hard for me to do anything different now than I have done then. You've had that experience, right? You know what that is like when you say, well, I want to go out and I want to do this, but I know what happened the last time I tried this, right? It's like when you're a kid learning how to ride a bicycle. You get up, the first time you get up and you go and you fall off, and if you don't have anyone there to encourage you, how hard is it to get back up on there and to do it a second time when you say, well, the first time I got on here, I fell off and it hurt. Why do I want to go and do this again? It's hard to overcome what has come before. For me to change, I have to let go of that past history. But letting go of that history is so difficult. Joshua, the high priest, is literally standing in that exact same place. He is the embodiment of the Jewish people's failure, of their sins, of their mistakes. He is a present symbol of the challenges that they will face going into the future. And here's the amazing thing that happens. Because we are presented with this, the adversary is making that case and is accusing Joshua of all of this, and Joshua is standing there in these dirty clothes. And then God speaks. God speaks. There's a messenger involved in there, but that gets really complicated in a minute. And I can almost feel God's presence in these words. And the Lord said to the adversary, "The Lord rebukes you, adversary. The Lord, the one choosing Jerusalem, rebukes you." God rebukes the adversary, rebukes all that he is saying, all that he stands for. And then maybe the most powerful thing, even more so than that, the Lord removes Joshua's filthy clothes. And then he says, "Look, I have removed your guilt from you. Put on priestly robes." Joshua has been changed. His guilt has been removed. He is made different from what he was before. But with that difference comes a new mission, because this isn't just that he is different from before, but now he has to actively be different going forward. He has a new mission in all of this. He could go back to the way that things were. The Jewish people could go back to the way that things were, but then they will lose everything. Rather, God places this mission on him. Now picking up in verses 6 to 7 in Zechariah chapter 3. "Then the Lord's messenger admonished Joshua, 'The Lord of heavenly forces proclaims, if you will walk in my paths, if you will keep my charge, then you will lead my house and guard my courts, and I will allow you to walk among those standing here.'" There is the promise. This is the promise that is given to Joshua, but it is also given to all of the people. Be forgiven now. Let go of what has come before now. Be different now. And know that you will have that promised future. So why is this important for us? Because you can make an argument that in the time that we live in, that we don't have time to deal with big, weighty theological problems. That we've got other bigger fish to fry, other bigger issues that we need to deal with. But go back to the story of the exile, of the return from exile. There would have been folks in that time that would have been saying all of these exact same things. All of the excuses that we can come up with, they would have been saying too. There would be folks that would be saying, "We just got back. We just got back from being exiled for a couple of generations. We need to focus on rebuilding, like really rebuilding. I've got a house to finish and a shed to finish, and the wife needs a she shed. I mean, we've got stuff that we need to do now." All of this doing better stuff, all of this being different from our ancestors, all of that stuff has to wait because we've got other priorities in this moment that we need to deal with. Or you would have some folks that would make an even, what I think is an even deeper argument. They would say, "Well, Lord, I'm just trying to get things worked out with my neighbor. Did you know that they didn't leave in the exile? That they've been here this whole time, and now we're back and we're trying to get rebuilt, but we've got to figure out who owns the field back behind the house. We've got to get these things worked out. I don't have time to work on being different from my grandparents and my great-grandparents that got kicked out of here in the first place. We got other things to deal with." For us, we can watch as we are suffering from a pandemic now. But one of the consequences of that pandemic is that it has brought to light many other problems in our society. The temptation is to say that we can't do anything about those bigger problems right now. We can't do anything about things like racism, or the wage gap, or the education gap, or the environment, or gender equality, and so on and so forth. There's another probably half dozen issues I could toss into that mix, because we could say that we have bigger issues that we need to deal with right now, rather than all of these things. We're in the middle of the pandemic. We've got to get that taken care of. And yet, these are all issues that have been made worse by the pandemic. They aren't going away anytime soon. And what we're finding is that all of these things are tied together. So we're in a place where we have to take them. But we can't begin to overcome them until we face them. And we can't ignore them. Joshua in Zechariah's vision was standing before God in his dirty clothes. You might even say he was standing in front of God, warts and all. And that was before he was made clean and he was charged with doing better. Joshua had to face what was wrong so he could know how to be different in the future. But remember that we can be different because God changed Joshua. God gave Joshua and the Jewish people new life after this. And I love that right after this, we get to something great. It's the reminder that we have hope for being different in the future. Verse 8 says, "Now listen, high priest Joshua, you and your companions sitting before you, these men are a sign. Look, I am about to bring my servant branch." There could be several things that branch means here. But one of the most prominent, and the one that holds the most weight, is that God is talking about the line of David. The greatest king that Israel had. The one who really started all of it. The great King David, the line of David, that branch, talking about him, that branch will come back. For us as Christian people, we see even more in this. We see that line being fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. We can't ignore or hide from the big problems. They are a part of us. And they keep us from being able to go forward. But we are reminded in the midst of this that God has a promise for us. And that God is sending us into something different and new and better. And if we can let go of what we have done in the past, we can become different from that. But we have to face it. We have to acknowledge that it is there. We have to acknowledge that it is a sin. We have to say that it has caused us problems, and we have to do something different from that. We have to know that it is a part of us, but then we can let it go. And the fulfillment of the promise comes in Jesus Christ that tells us that we can let it go, and then it gives us new life. We go into a world that has a lot of problems. And trying to explain them away or ignore them, or even in some cases we have decided to double down on them and saying, no, they aren't really problems, they're features of our society. That's the wrong solution. It means that we will never see the promise that God gives because in those times we're looking in the wrong direction. And we are choosing not to be different. Let us go today. Let us go to be different, to do the hard things, but know that we can go and we can do them with the help of the ultimate power in Jesus Christ. Let us go and let us do the different things. Let us be different from what has come before. And let us know that as we do that, we can live in the fulfillment of the promise that Christ brings into this world. Let us do this in Christ's name. Amen. I invite you to take a few moments of reflection and then join in our next song this morning, and our final song this morning.